Hello and welcome to Right Sports Talk. My name is Zach, and we are a little over 2 weeks removed from the end of the NFL season. However, we are a little over a month away from the beginning of the UFL season. And UFL training camp starts later this week. Before the start of training camp, I just wanted to kind of go over some players from each UFL team that I find as kind of notable players going into the season. For those of you who don't know what the UFL is, it stands for the United Football League, and it is basically the result of two spring leagues, the USFL and the XFL, merging together back in January of 2024 to create the United Football League. The United Football League has two conferences. It's made up of the USFL conference and the XFL conference. So I'm going to start off talking about players from USFL teams and then move on to the XFL conference teams. The first team that I want to talk about is the Birmingham Stallions. The Birmingham Stallions are the defending UFL champions, and before that, they were back-to-back champions of the USFL. So they've won 3 championships in a row in the league that they have been in. So they are a very, very good team. The first player that I want to talk about is linebacker Tay Crowder. Tay Crowder was not on the team last year. He just signed with them going into this season. Tay Crowder is a player that has NFL experience. He was the last pick of the draft in 2020, so he was Mr. Irrelevant in 2020, and he has actually a pretty interesting story for making it to the NFL. He went to college at Georgia and started off his career as a running back. Well, at the time that he was there was the same time as guys like Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and DeAndre Swift, who all went on to be NFL running backs. So I think his sophomore year or so, he started playing more special teams to try and just get on the field because he was behind such good running backs, and he started, making a bunch of tackles on special teams, and wound up actually being moved to linebacker, and wound up having a decent career as a linebacker in college, and wound up finding a way to the NFL. He had most of his success with the New York Giants, who were the team that drafted him in 2020. He was primarily a special teamer, and when he got the chance to play in the regular defense and get a little bit of starting experience, he played very well. So I do think that if he takes that work ethic and that kind of experience to the UFL and works hard, I think he will be a very good linebacker for this Birmingham Stallion team, which is already a very good team. So I do look forward to seeing what Tay Crowder can kind of bring to this defense. Next player I want to talk about is defensive lineman Carlos Davis. Carlos Davis is a guy that had a very good season last year for the Birmingham Stallions in the UFL. He went most of the season leading the league in sacks. He wound up finishing the season tied for second in sacks, and he was named to the All-UFL team. He's a very good interior defensive lineman. So he's very good at generating pressure up the middle, and he's a very talented defensive lineman. I look forward to seeing what he can do this season. The next player I want to talk about is Kahava Tensino, who is a linebacker. Another very good linebacker for this Stallions team last year. He was top 5 in tackles for the UFL last season. And I remember I did weekly game picks for the UFL throughout the whole season last year. And I remember as it got into the playoffs and close to the championship game, I would kind of talk about some key players. And for the Birmingham Stallions, one of the key players I talked about that could be an impact player for them in the playoffs was Tenzino, and I'm very excited to see what he can do in the same linebacking core as a Tay Crowder, and maybe he will compete for the league lead in tackles instead of just being top 5. But I think he's another guy that can have a very good season, especially on this very talented defense. And I'll talk about some offensive players. First one I want to talk about is quarterback Matt Corral. Matt Corral is a player that was on the Stallions team last season. I believe he was their week 1 starter, and he played he played good. Ultimately, throughout the season, he wound up being replaced by Adrian Martinez, who would go on to win UFL MVP at the quarterback position. Matt Corral is a player that is a very talented young player. He's showed a lot of potential back in college at Ole Miss. Back in 2022, was drafted by the Carolina Panthers. Unfortunately, suffered a season-ending injury in the preseason of his rookie year, and never really got a fair shot in the NFL. 2023, the Panthers moved on from him, drafting Bryce Young number 1 overall in the draft, and he never really got another shot in the NFL. And it looks like this year could possibly be his shot in the UFL. However, the Birmingham Stallions are bringing back another very talented quarterback in Alex McGough, who was their starting quarterback in 2023 and was the 2023 USFL MVP. So you can have a bit of a quarterback competition with Corral and Alex McGough. Alex McGough, in addition to being MVP of the USFL in 2023, after that spring season, went on to go to the. He had a little bit of a stint in Seattle, ultimately wound up in Green Bay on their practice squad for the 2023 and 2024 seasons. He's a player that actually Green Bay tried to convert him to receiver. So maybe if Corral winds up being the guy at quarterback, McGough could, still have a role on this team as a wide receiver and probably be a pretty decent receiving weapon. And, if he's not the starting quarterback, he can still contribute a lot for this team. Next player I want to talk about is tight end Jace Sternberger, who's a very talented young tight end. He was voted to the All UFL team last season, and as a tight end, he was top 10 in the whole league in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. So he was outperforming a lot of receivers. So he's a very talented young tight end, very good, very big receiving threat. And I think it's something he can really build on going into this year. The final players that I want to talk about for the Stallions are their two very talented running backs, CJ Maribel and Ricky Pearson. They are a very good running back tandem. They both played very well last season for the Stallions. They were both top 10 in rushing yards and top 10 in rushing touchdowns last season. Maribel was number 6 in rushing touchdowns, and Pearson was number 1 in the whole league in terms of rushing touchdowns. So they're a very good tandem. I think they will be, very good for this offense once again. Very much look forward to seeing what they can do based off of their success from last year. The next team I want to talk about is the Houston Roughnecks. The first player I want to talk about for them is wide receiver Justin Hall. He's a very good dynamic receiver. He was tied for first in receptions in the UFL last season. He was number 3 in receiving touchdowns, and he was number 3 in receiving yards and number 9 in receiving touchdowns last season. It's kind of a big deal for the Houston Roughnecks because they had a lot of quarterback struggles, and he's kind of the most notable player that I have from their team last year that is returning this season, and I think he could continue to have another very good season. The next player I want to talk about is tight end Josh Peterson. If you recognize the last name, it's because he is the son of former Jaguars and Eagles head coach Doug Peterson. Josh Peterson spent the last 2 seasons on the Jaguars practice squad. In 2023, he was on the Houston Gamblers of the USFL in that spring. That season, he was second on the team in receptions with 24, and he had 325 receiving yards, both of which would have been good enough to be a top 5 tight end in the UFL last season. So he's a very, very talented tight end that could hopefully give another receiving option for this Roughnecks offense in addition to Justin Hall. Now, the last kind of players I want to talk about is quarterbacks. So the most notable quarterback coming back for the Houston Roughnecks is Nolan Henderson, who got some playing time for them last season, but ultimately was not all that great. I don't know if he's going to be the starter going into the season this year. And the other quarterback that I want to talk about is one they signed this going into this season is Anthony Brown, who is a quarterback who has some NFL experience. He started one game for the Ravens in 2022, and he's kind of bounced around some NFL practice squads, been the Raiders, most recently with the Cardinals. He seems like a very good, young, dual threat quarterback, and based off of how the team is around him, I'm thinking he could be their best option to be the starting quarterback in Houston, based on the fact he can run around behind an offensive line that's not all that good, with some not great skill position players, minus a handful of good players around him. So I do think that Anthony Brown could be the guy that winds up being their starting quarterback. The next team that I want to talk about is the Memphis Showboats. First off, I want to talk about their quarterback, E.J. Perry. E.J. Perry is a very talented young quarterback. He was previously on the Michigan Panthers, who are also in the USFL conference. He played in 4 games for the Panthers last season for suffering an injury. He had 664 passing yards and 6 total touchdowns. So he's very talented when healthy. He's a very good runner. Most of his touchdowns came on the ground. He's a player that, if you look at him, you don't think he's going to be able to run around much, but he kept last season, did a very good job of the games he did play in, keeping drives alive with his legs. I think that's something he could continue to do with the Memphis Showboats. The next player that I want to talk about, wide receiver Dawood Davis. He was in the UFL last season. He was voted to the All UFL team. He was 7th in receiving yards and tied for 2nd in receiving touchdowns. He's a player that got some looks in training camps after the UFL season ended. Ultimately didn't make any NFL teams, but he is back here in Memphis. And he's another guy that's a very talented player. If I remember correctly, he's a very good, deep threat. Somebody that can take the lid off a defense. So I'm excited to see what he can do with, hopefully a healthy E.J. Perry. The next guy I want to talk about is safety Obi Melifonwu. So he's the player that has NFL experience. He was a 2nd-round draft pick in 2017. So he has 4 seasons total of NFL experience. He's a little bit older. I believe he's 30 years old. But, he's played in NFL teams. He was on the Patriots roster in 2018 when they won a Super Bowl. So he's been around very talented defensive coaches, and he's a player that I'm just excited to see what he can bring to this Showboats defense, and see what kind of experience he brings with him to the UFL. The last player from Memphis that I want to talk about is Matt Coughlin, their kicker. So he was a very talented kicker last year for them. He had their offense was not the best last season. He made 16 of 17 field goal attempts for them last season, was 3rd in the league in field goals, and there was a handful of games that I could think of from last year in which it seemed like Coughlin was Memphis's really only chance on offense to score points. So he's a very talented kicker. Hopefully hopefully it's not so many field goals, or gets more shots at field goals, because their offense is driving down the field a little bit better this season. Those are the guys for the Showboats that I think are notable. Now, the last USFL conference team is the Michigan Panthers. Some notable players for them are wide receiver Marcus Sims, a very talented receiver. He was another guy that was all UFL last season, was top 10 in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. Really helped out this offense a lot. Really helped out not just E.J. Perry at quarterback, but a couple other quarterbacks they have coming back this season, and Danny Etling. Danny Etling is somebody that played in 7 games last season, and he wound up 8th in the league in passing yards. Danny Etling is a guy that has some NFL experience, most notably back in 2018. He was in training camp with the New England Patriots, and in their final preseason game, the thing that I can remember most for is he busted a big 86-yard touchdown run. But he's another guy that he's been on the Michigan Panthers for a few years, so he's got some experience with them. He's still very talented, very young quarterback. I think could possibly go into the season as the starter. The other quarterback they have that I think can make a compelling case for being the starter is Bryce Perkins, who's another guy who played in a few games last season and did a lot of damage rushing. So very, very good running quarterback. We'll kind of see how if he's developed between seasons as a passer. But I think they have two very good options with quarterbacks. Obviously, they got Marcus Sims to throw the ball to. And the last offensive player that I want to talk about is running back Matthew Colburn, who was in a running back tandem last year with Willis Hill, who is not in the league this season. But he was a very good running back last season for the Michigan Panthers. But Matthew Colburn, also a very good running back, was number 5 in the league in rushing yards and number 7 in rushing touchdowns. He really set up to be the number 1 running back for the Michigan Panthers this season, and somebody that I think can really help, sustain their offense and kind of be somebody that should be a very good number 1 running back based off of how he performed last season for this team. The last couple guys that I want to talk about are, first off, linebacker Frank Ginda. He has spent the past 3 seasons with the Michigan Panthers. He had an okay season last year. He's, pretty much about average to above average linebacker season. But in 2023, in the USFL, he was the Defensive Player of the Year. So he's a very talented linebacker. And, maybe, I don't know. So he's a very talented linebacker, and I look forward to seeing what he can do this season. He's, shown potential that he can be the best linebacker and be the best player or the best defensive player in a league. So see if he kind of takes another step forward this season. And the last player that I really want to talk about is safety Kai Nakua. If that last name sounds familiar, he is the oldest brother of he's the older brother of Puka Nakua and the oldest of the Nakua family brothers. There's another Nakua that is also on the Michigan Panthers. He's a wide receiver, Samson Nakua. He hasn't really done much to kind of stand out. Samson Nakua is a guy that played in the UFL last season a little bit, was in training camp with the Saints, but ultimately nothing came of it, and now he's back with the Michigan Panthers. However, Kai Nakua is a very talented safety. He was all UFL last season. He was tied for first in interceptions, and he's another guy that has some NFL experience, having bounced around to a few teams and got some NFL action, mainly on special teams, but he's very mature player. He brings lots of experience to this team, and he's shown the ability that he can kind of be a little bit of a ball hawk back there. He's also a very good tackler. He's a very good all-around safety that I think can really, really help this defense going into this season. Now, moving on to the XFL conference. The first team that I want to talk about is the Arlington Renegades. And the first player that I want to talk about is their quarterback, Luis Perez. Luis Perez is a guy that is, he's Mr. Spring Football. He has played in pretty much any spring football league you can think of. He played in the All-American Football League, played in the XFL in 2020 and 2023. He played in the United States Football League in 2022. Last season in the UFL for the Arlington Renegades, he led the UFL in passing yards and passing touchdowns. He is one of the best quarterbacks in the UFL and could kind of make the case for being the best quarterback in the UFL, especially going into this season. So really excited to see what experience he can do this season, and maybe try to bring the Arlington Renegades back to a championship. He was their quarterback in 2023 when they won the XFL championship. So I know he would love to try and bring the Arlington Renegades a UFL championship. The next player that I want to talk about is linebacker Donald Payne, who was on this team last season. He was fourth in the UFL last season in tackles. He's another guy that has some NFL experience and a few years of spring football experience. In 2022, he played in the USFL and was the tackle leader in that league. He is, a tackling machine. He's a very smart linebacker that comes with, experience in football. He's kind of their leader on defense to, be their quarterback of their defense in the linebacking core. He's a very talented linebacker. The final guy I want to talk about for the Arlington Renegades is wide receiver Damon Sheehy Giuseppe. So he's a player that is most notable for me for spending the preseason in 2019 with the Cleveland Browns. He's a guy that has a tremendous work ethic to work his way to get an NFL tryout that season. He went to a very small, I believe, junior college and got his shot in the NFL with the Browns in the preseason. I had a very decent preseason, especially as a punt returner. I believe he had a very big punt return that preseason. He's a guy that in 2020 played in the XFL until it shut down due to COVID. And he's just somebody that continues to work at his craft and continue to try and make a career in football. I just want to take a break for a second. And some of these guys I'm talking about, Tay Crowder, Kainakua, Giuseppe, are guys that YouTuber Flemlo Raps has done more in-depth retrospectives of these players. If you want to know more in-depth on some of these players in the UFL, go check out Flemlo Raps YouTube channel. He's got very good in-depth analysis on a lot of former NFL players, current UFL players. He's got a lot of in-depth analysis on a lot of former players. Moving on to the DC Defenders. First guy I want to talk about is quarterback Jordan Ta'amu. He's another guy that has a lot of spring football experience. He's played in the USFL in 2022, 2023 played in the XFL, 2020 before it shut down played in the XFL. Last season in the UFL, he was second in passing yards and he was tied for second in passing touchdowns. He's another player that could make the argument for being the best quarterback or one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He is a very, very good quarterback that is another guy that can really lead his team, and try to get them a championship. Next up, I want to talk about running back Abram Smith. Abram Smith, unfortunately, was injured all of last season. He spent that season with a knee. He was out last season with a knee injury. But he is a very talented young running back. In 2023 in the XFL, he was the rushing leader. He is, one of the more talented running backs when healthy. So hopefully he has healed up from his knee injury and can get back on the field and be somewhat close to the form he was in 2023. He was a very good running back 2 years ago and hopefully can be close to that same kind of running back coming off of his injury. Next up, I want to talk about wide receiver Chris Rowland. Chris Rowland was actually the 2024 leader in all-purpose yards for the UFL. He had the only kick return touchdown in the UFL last season. UFL is actually changing their kickoff rules adopting the old XFL kickoff rules, which is the kickoff rule which was in the NFL this past season of the dynamic kickoff, where you have the kind of landing zone for a returner, and I think a landing zone for a ball, and it encourages more kickoff returns. So I think Chris Rowland is a guy that, very good receiver and an exceptional return man that under these kickoff rules could have a few kickoff returns and make some electrifying plays. The last player I want to talk about for the Defenders is defensive end Malik Fisher. Malik Fisher was tied for second in the UFL last season in sacks with Carlos Davis. He's another very talented young defensive lineman that he got some looks in training camp with some teams. I believe he spent this 2024 preseason with the Houston Texans, but ultimately didn't make the team. But he is still a very talented player, and I think he can really, get after and disrupt some of the quarterbacks in this league. The next team I want to talk about is the San Antonio Brahmas. I'm going to start off by talking about their kicker, Donald De La Haye, aka also known as the YouTuber Destroying. He's a player that was on their team last season. Unfortunately, didn't get to attempt a field goal. He played a little over one game because he suffered a neck injury making a tackle in their second game of the season. It appears that he is coming back for this season, and he's a very big name, very well-known person that can try to get some eyes on the product. And he's also a very good kicker. Hopefully, he actually gets a chance to show off his leg strength this season. The next player I want to talk about is quarterback Jarrett Garantano. Garantano played in the UFL last season. He played 4 games for the Houston Roughnecks before suffering an injury. He didn't have the greatest stats in those 4 games, but he definitely shows flashes of looking like a very talented young quarterback. Hopefully he can stay healthy, especially with a pretty decent roster around him. I think a much better roster than he had around him in Houston, and can kind of show off a little bit more of what he can do as a quarterback this season as opposed to last season. Next I want to talk about is running back John Lovett. John Lovett last season was 4th in the league in rushing yards and 2nd in rushing touchdowns. He's another guy that he was in a running back tandem last year. He's got the chance to be the number 1 guy this year, and I think will make the most of that opportunity as he is a very talented runner. I think he can have a very, very good season being the showcase number 1 workhorse running back in this offense. The last player that I want to talk about is Jordan Mosley, a safety for their team, who was 2nd in tackles in the UFL last season, and he was 1st in solo tackles. This is a guy that is very much a tackling machine, very talented safety, very good at bringing ball carriers to the ground. He's just somebody that can help elevate this defense. Now, the last team that I want to talk about is the St. Louis Battlehawks. The first player that I'm going to talk about is wide receiver Andy Isabella. Andy Isabella is a player that was not in the UFL last season. He's somebody that had a little bit of a stint in the NFL. In 2019, he was, I believe, a 2nd-round pick of the Arizona Cardinals. Kind of bounced around a little bit in the NFL, and unfortunately couldn't stay in the NFL. Has found his way to the UFL. He's a very talented wide receiver. He's very fast. He's very shifty, which I think will work. I think he will be a very nice complement to one of their other wide receivers, Hakeem Butler, who Hakeem Butler was the 2024 UFL Offensive Player of the Year. He was the leader in receiving yards, and Hakeem Butler is a physical freak. He is 6'5", he's around 225 pounds, he runs fast. So I think him on the outside and Andy Isabella more so that slot guy that's shifty. I think they'll be a very, very good wide receiver tandem. The next player that I want to talk about is kicker Rodrigo Blankenship. Blankenship is a guy that is another guy that had a shot in the NFL. Ultimately, was drafted in 2021, I want to say, by the Indianapolis Colts. Unfortunately, didn't, had struggles as a rookie and was out of the league within a couple of years. He's making his return to professional football. I'm very excited to see what he can do because he is a very talented kicker. Hopefully, he can kind of get his mental process good for continuing to be a very good kicker and can make some big kicks for this team this year. The final offensive player that I want to talk about is running back Jacob Sailors. Jacob Sailors, another super talented running back. In 2020, he was voted to the 2024 All UFL team. He was second in the league in rushing yards and tied for second in rushing touchdowns. He's also a pretty good receiving back. He had 3 receiving touchdowns and spent last summer and training camp and preseason with the New York Giants. He's a very explosive running back that is a fairly young running back that has gotten NFL looks. So he's very talented, very good, straight line runner, shifty, fast, good receiver. He could arguably be the best well-rounded, best all-around running back in the UFL. I'm very excited to see what he can do this season. Sorry, I lied that was the last offensive player. The real last offensive player is quarterback Manny Wilkins, who played in 3 games for the Battlehawks last season. He's a very talented dual threat quarterback who had, in those 3 games, 306 passing yards, 141 rushing yards, and 4 total touchdowns. So another guy that he's more so of a rusher than he is a passer, but he is a good passer, and hopefully if he can develop more as a passer, can be a very good quarterback in this league. Now, the final player that I want to talk about is linebacker Willie Harvey. Willie Harvey was all UFL in 2024. He was the tackle leader in 2024. Kind of the leader on this defense. Obviously, very good tackler. Very good all-around linebacker that can help really elevate this defense and really help keep opposing offenses out of the game and allow for their offense to just kind of go off. So those are notable players to me going into this UFL season. If there's anybody that I didn't talk about that you can think of, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.